Unusually warm temperatures continue for a lot of the western U.S., spreading east through the week. Fire weather concerns for the southeast today, spreading back into the lee of the Rockies by Thursday. Rain and precipitation mostly for the northern parts of the U.S., severe possible for the central U.S. on Thursday. Taking a look at your U.S. weekly weather outlook for this weekend into next week, the biggest story has really been significant warmth across much of the western U.S., and this is owing to a significant ridge or area of high pressure. But we sometimes diagnose the ridging at mid levels of the atmosphere. So we're looking at 500 millibars. This is sort of midway through the troposphere, and this gives us a sense of where a lot of our weather patterns originate, where there's ridges and where there's troughs. Where the heights are higher is where we have ridging, and that corresponds to these orange and red colors across much of the western U.S. These are anomalies for this time of year. So this says for this time of year, the heights at mid-levels, that is the height that you have to go to reach the 500 millibar level, yeah, it's higher than usual. That air mass is generally warmer. So because of ideal gas law, that air mass takes up more room, more volume. So we have higher heights. We see those orange and red colors across much of the western U.S., troughing, a trough across parts of the Great Lakes. Currently, that's lifting off to the east. And actually, we can sort of step this back. This is the ensemble of the European forecast system. So this is the average of all that. So it gives us a pretty good sense of what a lot of the forecasts are saying at the current time. And we can actually back this up and see that ridging was even more intense. As we looked back to Friday and over the weekend, we saw this break down a little bit as troughing sort of overtook and spread mostly now again over the Great Lakes. And as we sort of pan this forward, we see that this amplifies just a little bit more. We see a trough beginning to approach to the Pacific Northwest. That's going to bring some precipitation, mountain snow for the Cascades. And then we begin to see as this pattern becomes a little bit more zonal, these higher heights, this area of higher pressure spreads east. And with that, we'll see warmer temperatures spreading back further east through the week, seeing a little bit more significant troughing developing across the northeast, that original trough across the Pacific Northwest, moving over to the northeast. By later in the week, as we head to next week, this weekend and next week, we'll see this ridge sort of take place again before we turn our attention to another trough coming onshore next week. The big story, again, has been the warmth. And we can look at what are the forecast temperatures and where are we seeing record high temperatures. We're going to tie or break the daily high temperature for today. For Monday, we have 26 potential records for high temperatures. So this is saying basically we know what the high temperature record is for this day, and the forecast from the National Weather Service, NDFD is the forecast coming from the National Weather Service, that's going to match or exceed the forecast high. So we see record high temperatures expected for much of the Southwest. We see here in the Southeast, this is Charleston, looking to see high temperature of 87. That would tie the record back from 1995. So we saw a lot of records broken across central and western parts of the U.S. over the weekend. And after this cold front moving across the east, confined down more to the west. As we look to tomorrow, we see record high temperatures expanding again further to the north, further to the east, across Intermountain West, even up into Idaho and Wyoming. Temperatures in the 90s, well northward. And then we see that continue to expand as we head into Wednesday, further to the north, further to the east. Thursday, that continues. I mentioned that trough that's coming in. That's going to sort of flatten this ridge, but it's going to help expand and help advance some of those warmer temperatures. Further to the east, we see that continuing expanding and then really remaining in place. So we're seeing a pretty prolonged area, very warm and honestly summer-like temperatures across much of the southwest quadrant of the U.S. And as we look at current conditions, we're already seeing temperatures well into the 80s and 90s across interior portions of the Southwest. I just want to call out that we do have continued heat products of heat advisories for coastal portions of the south central part of the California coast in effect through Tuesday. A couple of things to call out. We have fire weather watches and red flag warnings for parts of the central U.S., high wind warnings as well. We'll talk about that. Some potential fire concerns, elevated fire weather concerns for parts of the southeast behind this cold front, still fairly warm, drier conditions with relative humidities dropping into the 30s. That's not as low as we typically see out west, but for the southeast, that's rather low. And we see from the Storm Prediction Center this combination of warm temperatures, low relative humidity, and gusty winds. Those are sort of the three factors we think about in fire weather. We're seeing elevated fire weather concerns for that reason across an area expanding from central Virginia down into northern Georgia. Again, we're seeing that represented through temperatures in the 60s, 70s, 80s, with decreasing dew point and relative humidities and these breezy northwest winds behind this cold front that's generally bringing in cooler temperatures. Our concerns then for fire weather turn towards Thursday. We're expecting a better chance for elevated to critical conditions, particularly around Wyoming and surrounding areas. The reason for that, if we look at, again, at our 500 millibar level, we like to look at this as meteorologists. It gives us a good sense of where storm systems are, gives us a sense of how the response will be in terms of areas of low pressure and precipitation. A couple things I mentioned: shortwave trough broadly across much of the Great Lakes and Northeast. That continues to lift in the Northeast. That's what's driving this cold front and will allow it to stall across parts of southeast and south central parts of the U.S. Ridging remains strong across the Southwest. We see this next trough moving into the Pacific Northwest. That's going to bring ascent for lift. It's going to bring more moisture onshore to bring into the mountain ranges of the Northwest, bringing, again, valley rain, some mountain snow, and we'll see that sort of lift up above the trough and then begin to dig back in a little bit more across the Great Lakes and Northeast Thursday and into Friday. So what that's going to do, it's going to bring a belt of strong winds. It's going to help advance some of those warmer temperatures. So we're seeing expected strong winds across much of areas from some Montana down into Wyoming, not only into tomorrow, but especially as that trough moves across Wednesday and into Thursday. And again, that's going to create a combination of the warm temperatures, strong winds, low relative humidities. We know that we have a lot of dry fuels across much of the Intermountain West and low-lying areas and much of the central plains and lee of the Rockies. So when we get these really good setup, the Storm Prediction Centers calling out these fire weather elevated to critical conditions. Another thing I wanted to mention as well is this trough is going to help pull in some pretty juicy air mass. We're going to see dew points increasing out of the Gulf. This moisture being advected. That is, the winds are helping to draw a higher moisture air mass further north. We can see that the cold front initially helped wipe some of this moisture out, but we see that as this next trough approaches, helps form an area of low pressure that's going to create these southerly winds that advect this moisture up further to the north. By the time we get to Thursday, we have dew points 60 degrees or greater Fahrenheit, and that combined with stronger wind shear to the north is going to create some potential for severe weather. The day 4 outlook has a 15% categorical risk for severe weather from northern Missouri out towards Ohio. And if we look at what we sometimes combine, a combination of the moisture and the instability, sometimes what we call convective available potential energy, that combined with wind shear, we can have some of these different composite indices. And the higher they go, it can give us a sense of the potential for severe weather if we have something to initiate those storms. In this case, we're going to have a cold front that's going to push down further south in response to this trough moving from west to east. And if we look at the profile of conditions, I'm going to go a little bit deeper into what I typically show, but this is a forecast sounding. So this says, okay, what are the winds and what are the temperature and moisture as we go from the ground aloft? And there's a few things. As we look at the top left here, this is kind of our primary way of looking at this. As we go from the ground up, we can look at what our forecast winds are. The more those winds change direction and speed with height, the greater the wind shear is. And generally, this gives us a couple of forms to help storms rotate or become more organized if there's enough instability. So we can see in this case from this profile sounding for the Illinois-Indiana border on Thursday afternoon, evening, we can see that we have some curvature to this hodograph, this change of winds with height, and it's pretty long, meaning that winds are increasing with height. We have 50-knot winds at 700 millibars, so pretty good wind shear. We have dew points into the 60s here. The green line shows dew point from the ground up. Red is our temperature from the ground up, and where we can lift air from the ground up, and if it's warmer than the ambient temperature, where this theoretical parcel, if we lift the surface air up, If that blue line is to the right of the red line, that says that it's more positively buoyant. That means that we have convective available potential energy. It's the same thing if you forced a basketball underwater. It would be positively buoyant. It would want to accelerate upwards. This can be really important when we're talking about severe weather to understand, is the air warmer and more moist at the ground, that it would want to accelerate relative to the environment as it goes up. In this case, we have a lot of convective potential energy. We also have this cap, this lid, where the surface particles, when they're raised, they're actually to the left, or they're cooler than the environmental air. So air is not going to be able to rise on its own. You're going to need some lifting mechanism via the shortwave trough and cold front that can produce some lifting motion and help force those parcels up. And once you realize that, then those air parcels can accelerate, create a thunderstorm updraft, and when combined with this wind shear, could have some potential for severe weather. It's going to be organized convection. So that's why we're seeing the day 4 slight risk for severe potential weather. As we look into next week, what I'll call out is the potential for another trough to be coming onshore. This is the GFS solution. It's a little bit more aggressive at bringing this trough in sooner and then more deeply into the U.S. I'll show some different scenarios, but I do want to call out first the precipitation for this week right now. Mentioned the cold front moving across the southeast, some lingering precipitation and snow across parts of the northeast today. We'll see the next round really coming in midweek as we see a series of very weak impulses north of the cold front. But the next main system is impacting the Pacific Northwest Tuesday and into Wednesday. And as that trough moves, we'll see greater chances for rain and snow for the north and northeast U.S. By mid to late week, we can see some semblance of the cold frontier, and this is where we're going to see this potential for severe weather from northern Missouri up through Ohio. And as that front drops south, we'll see chance for precipitation dropping further south as well. And then pretty quiet as we generally go into this weekend, remaining warm out west, and then we turn our attention to possible precipitation developing early to mid next week. A lot of uncertainty as we head into next week. If we look at different forecasts, all the different forecasts we have, we can kind of cluster them to understand what are the differences in the 500 millibar heights, the potential designation of where troughs and ridges will be. We can see that a lot of forecast solutions are showing as we go into early to mid next week that yes, there is this trough that's approaching the west coast. Some are keeping this much further west. We have about 20% of all forecast members from all of the ensembles, from the GFS, from the Canadian model, from the European model. 20% of them are actually keeping that trough much further west. The majority are having that trough approaching the west coast as we go towards next Tuesday evening, the 1st of April, and then further uncertainty then as we go into April 1st and April 2nd. Will this trough actually come on shore? Will it remain further west? This will just be a question of whether this trough is going to have impacts just at the west coast, or if it's going to move inland like this cohort of ensemble members show. This would bring a little bit more precipitation further inland into the interior west, into the central plains. So there's some uncertainty of where exactly that trough sets up, but we do see from NOAA's Climate Prediction Center that we do see slight chances for elevated winds next week for much of the central U.S., slight chances for heavier precipitation as well. This is, again, that scenario if that trough does progress further east into the U.S. So right now, we'll keep an eye for next week, some uncertainty with that, but really the main confidence is that we're going to see precipitation chances really for the northern U.S. and remaining quite warm, especially for the southwest U.S.